Thank you. The last speaker of the whole day, which is apropos. If you talk to my children, I can close down a party like nobody's business. All right. So, how do I get to my... All right. All right, great. So, I live in Boston. And a couple of weeks ago, my partner and I were having dinner at a shabu shabu restaurant in Brighton. And we sat down, and a couple was at the table next to us, apparently on their first date. And the gentleman was talking loudly, and he was apparently an MBA student, just recently graduated from BU. Now, in Boston, you can't shake a stick without hitting a student. Lots of times we want to shake lots of sticks to hit lots of students. But I looked at my partner and said, please make it stop. Please, I don't want to hear this. And he said, well, if he's trying to get his date to run out of the restaurant like our hair was on fire, he's killing it. Then he changed the subject to research that his professors were doing. And I perked up, and that's when my partner went, oh, God. And so he was saying that his professors have no interest in the courses that they teach. The only reason they're there is to do research, and the research they're doing is not relevant. And this is an MBA student now, or recent graduate. Emerald is a business management, primarily, I like to say, since that's my collection, a business management publisher. And for 25 years, business scholars have been saying they need to make their research relevant. It was in the record of Academy of Management, and yet we're still hearing that students aren't seeing how the research is being done that is realistic to what they do when they get out into the world. How to make the research relevant. So to better understand this landscape, in 2017, Emerald commissioned, I need to change I should have been like Kent and not done other way. Okay. In 2017, Emerald commissioned a study to investigate researchers and the research to practice gap in business and management, which is an applied field, so you would think that that gap would be lower. We surveyed 1,600 authors and conducted in-depth interviews with practitioners. And the overarching findings confirmed what many of us already suspected, which is that there is a gap, and it's real. One of the funny examples is that 60% of the researchers feel like business people need to learn how to read research articles to get their content, and 60% of the practitioners think that business people need to learn how to write so that they can understand what they're saying. So not only is the gap in the research there, but the gap in the communication of that research is there as well. So the other findings, business and management professionals considered non-academic outlets far more important for learning about research than academic outlets. So we're not talking about general business management articles that you would find in a general magazine. We're talking about research, and yet they still feel like it's better coming from a general journal magazine instead of a journal. And researchers say that they prefer impact, but they frequently ignore it in practice. The number one way they choose a journal is impact factor. Research with practical relevance ranks 6th for academics. It ranks 1st for professionals. So alone, this is probably the long-standing idea that academic research frequently lacks relevance and accessibility. Academic research researchers tend to pursue academic impact with the traditional, what we're talking impact, over society impact, even though they agree that collaborating with non-academic people, professionals, generally produces highly cited research. They still go to their old ways of doing it. And why do they do that? Because they're not incentivized. They have to get the research done quickly. Getting professionals to collaborate, co-create from the very beginning of the research project all the way through the end is probably a lot like herding cats for them. And they don't have the time or the patience, and they're not incentivized to do it. So they're going it alone, and at the end of the project, they will bring a professional in to give a impact for the business impact instead of co-creating right from the very beginning. So the call to action is a fundamental restructure of how academics are incentivized. Last year, Emerald published a white paper called The Business Impact. I should make Mike responsible for this. There we go. Published a white paper for business impact. Does anyone use management research? Which you can download there, it's on there. And given the challenges involved, academics need powerful incentives to carry out the changes because it's so fundamental to everything that they're doing. Incentives are an important part of the picture. They in place and serendipity are also an important part of the whole research realm because they need to have access to professionals who are willing to co-create research with them. Three organizations play an important key role in all of this. Business schools, who are teaching through their MBA programs, the business leaders of tomorrow. Professional societies, associations that businesses belong to. And the final one, and the one that we're most interested in, are, of course, publishers. And publishers can be a conduit for knowledge networks simply because we're already creating those with our journals. We add value to research by commissioning summaries. These are some of the things that Emerald is doing. Commissioning summaries and commentaries that will look at the practical implications of some of the research. And listening throughout today, there are many other publishers and societies that are doing these same things. And it's important in just not business management, but across all fields. Recruiting more practitioners to editorial advisory boards is an initiative that we're undertaking. We're also investing in technologies to make answers within the papers that we publish easier to find, discoverability easier. We're systematic data tagging so that people will be able to find it once it is published. We will be taking a look at publishing more immediate and impact for outlets, sometimes just as easy as Facebook, to becoming an integral part of, I'm going to get this before the end of the thing. There we go. So by becoming an integral part of the communication between practitioners and researchers, hopefully those conversations that I had to overhear at the restaurant will be less about how relevant, and we could hear instead about how excited someone is about the research that they're hearing about in school. And maybe we can actually hear from the woman who was at the table whose voice we never did hear, but I think that might be another session from today or tomorrow. So anyway, thank you very much.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes for Q&A, and that's the only thing preventing you from getting a drink at the exhibit hall. So I will open it up to the audience, but I just want to spark the discussion by asking a question. So at Emerald, we talk a lot about impact awakening and impact readiness of our author base, of our researchers generally in our various markets. And I'm curious to ask the panel just their general sense based on working with these markets. What is the impact readiness of researchers in the U.S.? So Patty had some reservations about how willing they are to look past traditional academic incentives. But do we have a chance of ever winning hearts and minds and encouraging research to be conducted that is done in collaboration with practitioners and that actually has a chance of changing the world for the better?
Yes, I hope. I'm hopeful, although most people call me a pessimist. But we're starting, and I think that there are plenty of other people that are starting it, but we are in the process of developing a toolkit that schools can look at to give an evaluation of their real-world impact, which I think is going to lead a long way toward doing that, when they can take a look at what they're doing now and see where they want to go, and using a toolkit like that. We're also going to be starting some training programs to actually train people. So this gap that I talked about with 60% of the researchers think that practitioners just need to learn how to read research, and 60% of the practitioners think that that they need to write more accessibly. We can kind of divide that by training people to write more accessibly. We know this from research previously done, that even scholars appreciate it when articles are written accessibly.
Any other thoughts?
I don't know if I have to push anything. I guess I don't. So I kind of disagree with the premise. It won't surprise you. Which is that researchers who are well ahead of practice aren't making the world a better place. I think if you actually tie researchers to the level of practice, that you could actually inhibit research. I think David made that point quite eloquently. So, there's a lot of frustration in the medical sciences and life sciences about how long it takes for changes in practice to become adopted after research results are published. But that's because there are multiple layers trying to attenuate the risk of those new findings to patient care, to the system overall, weighing positives and negatives and other competing priorities. And I think that's probably okay. I think what we kind of need to get our heads around is that the time scale of science is not 18 months. It's not 5 years. It's not 10 years. It may be 50 years. It may be 100 years. It may be 500 years in some cases. There are still mathematical proofs that people are still contemplating. There are still questions about various elements of how the world works, and mysteries that we still need to solve. And are we going to be so impatient that we simply say, well, we can't take the time to discover those things? It all has to be about whether we're getting bang for our buck in the next 60 months.
Anyone want to back me up?
Well, I'll just say academics are smart people, academic researchers. They also are people who like to have jobs and houses and feed their families. And if you tell them, this is what is required for you to get a job, this is what is required for you to get tenure, that's what they do. And right now they are optimizing for the current set of requirements that are put on them. I think the funding agencies may be a more fruitful path, because the schools care a lot about how you're going to bring in money, and they'll adjust to that, and then we'll adjust to what the academics are doing as well. But I think I really think that one of the things that I keep thinking about from this session is this shift from academia to industry, and how do you measure that? Because a lot of industry, they don't publish journal articles, they go out and they make products. And I think, it's interesting, all the stuff that Anne and her group are doing of trying to dig out these sort of complex, hidden connections, I think is really fascinating stuff. And I also think we're at this point of a shift in academia. I don't know if peak academia is the way to put it, but we're seeing this cultural shift where it's always been everybody should go to graduate school, and the one true path is to stay in academia and be, you know, a college professor and do your research. And the numbers are actually coming out now, which they may have been this way for a very long time, but very few people who go into academia, who get a degree, who do research actually stay. You know, it's 10, 20% in most fields. And you're seeing a cultural shift of people are being told about this before they go into, and what does that mean if the majority of people who are doing the research don't stay in academia, and so much of what we do is focused on academia and academia's practices and academia's, you know, publications. We need to start thinking about a shift to other areas where the research may be moving.
And I'll just round it up by saying, I think you asked about a timeline for a shift in, away from traditional metrics. And I think there is a level of frustration out there that we hear regularly. A lot of my interactions are actually with vice provosts of research and folks who are making tenure and investment decisions. And I'm, happily showing them how we can measure through these various metrics, scholarly output and field-weighted citation. And I had a provost say to me, I don't care about any of that, and I don't care how much they publish. I just want to know if this is a good person. And I thought, we haven't developed the metric for that. But this idea that somehow real-world impact can factor into it is very important, and I think administrations are starting to look at this.
I just want to also add, I think that one of the problems that we have in that that's causing that cultural shift, and I'd be interested in your perspective, and well, everyone's here, is the fact that we have seen top-end funding pulled back, and we've seen support of the academic lifestyle actually pulled back. And so, of course, people, are laden with debt when they leave school, or they end up, going to graduate school and not making enough money, or there's not a career path, and so, of course, they look for something else. Like you said, they're practical, right? They have to live, and they want to succeed, and they want to have a happy time for their family. So if we were to fund the academic lifestyle adequately and fund research, we may get more research done. That's not happening for a whole bunch of reasons. And part of what my thinking is on that is that we have, for the past 20 years, been stagnating intellectually. Because of this false equivalency issue that's the heart of all the information space at this point, where everything has a pro and con, everything has two sides. We've got this information relevancy that that isn't correct. There is a up and there is a down, there is a right and there is a left. And so as long as we have we're stuck at the policy level, we don't know what we want to pursue, we don't know what we want to fund, is it, are we okay with, poison water in Flint? Are we okay with, streams being muddy, and we're going to squelch the science? It's a mess because we don't have a clean information space, and I think that's one of the biggest problems, and it's leading to all sorts of bad political decisions that affect academic life.
All right, we have time for maybe one or two questions in the back. I don't think we have a microphone, so speak loudly.
Bear with me, this may be a bit of a meandering way to get to my question for the whole panel, but I think we primarily can. Preaching to the choir, science takes a long time, all the new metrics that are used take a long time, researchers are playing the funding game, they don't have the time, to get their next grant or tenure or whatever, because they got X amount of citations or whatever. And I want to interject an analogy that I think is appropriate. So I think it was Kent who talked about everything going on with journalism and things like that. Same thing, journalists used to get paid to be reporters, right? Report facts, check their sources, things like that. And now we have bloggers, clickbait, people who are chasing clicks, views, same, as my analogy with all metrics. Same thing, we're chasing the same thing. And we see through retractions and other things, plagiarism, that it's not the stuff we publish guess my question is, what, and I think what David said, you know, we're playing, the funding agency to set the rules for the game, right, primarily. What is the metric, or what is the, probably doesn't have an answer. What is the step towards a solution of measuring impact or quality or whatever it is?
So there was an interesting, in the book Sapiens, there's a really interesting long-term metric for societies that pursue scientific truth. And I forget the exact numbers, but it's something like the efficiency of energy production in those societies increased 140%. Basically, they became much more energy efficient because they learned how to master the material world much better. And so they were able to get much more productivity at much less physical cost and much less natural resource cost. And they also were richer. Generally, they had more wealth that was better distributed. And I think, you know, you get into things like lifespan. One of the big concerns about in the medical profession and public health is that for the first time in memory, probably in a century, lifespan in the U.S. is going down, right? That's a metric. So I think they're very large-scale social metrics. And I also mentioned that, you know, there's the clock of the long now, where, you know, there was the urge to think about 10,000-year spans and what decisions would you make if you thought of a 10,000-year span of human survival and prosperousness, right? Prosperity. What decisions would you make if you thought on that time span? It was Brian Eno, Stuart Brand, and a whole bunch of other people, and they built a clock to run 10,000 years. I think it was completed recently, or is about to be completed. And that's the kind of different kinds of thinking. And then you would think about metrics that aren't about clicks or about even citations necessarily, but would be about, okay, we're going to check in a decade to see if our spending yielded, or 20, you know, what we expected as far as human longevity, child mortality, wealth generation, efficiency of energy production, things like that. I think they're very reasonable, and it's always has to be measured at a social level to me. And right now, I think we're failing to look at it that way. I think we're missing the forest for the trees, and that would be my response to your provocation there.
Yeah, I mean, I also, you know, when you think of metrics, I mean, most of the metrics that we're using are an attempt to take a qualitative decision. Is this any good? And fuzzy match that to a numerical list. And I think you run into this major issue when you think that everything can be quantitated, everything can be numericized. And I think, you know, Kent really is sort of getting at some of this stuff of the complete disdain for expertise in the modern world. And the idea of, well, can we put together panels of experts who make qualitative decisions, this is good, this is bad, and say that's okay. I mean, when we do peer review on a paper, that's a qualitative decision. You're asking people to say, is this any good? And we're okay with that, and the editor makes a decision. Yeah, this is pretty good. There's no like, all right, this paper, I ran it through my algorithm and it came out at 7.3 and it has to be a 7.4 to get into my journal. I think a recognition of it's okay to be based on expert opinion, to make decisions based on that, although you do get into the question of scale at that point.
So, sorry, as I was meandering, I left out one of my points that just reminded me of. So recently Elon Musk got upset because the reporter said something negative or whatever, and he suggested creating a service which ranks the legitimacy and honesty of
Right,
journalism.
the news media. Yeah.
And I think there's, again, another analogy there for what we do. I don't know.
Right.
The objective grand council of RICS.
Well, Elon got off into some weird,
Yeah.
of, you know, who owns the media sort of questions, and
Yeah,
some strange discussions there. But, and also then, who watches the Watchmen?
I do think what you say is very important, though, particularly as there's a push within scientific publishing to more open content and also more preprint content, which will be mineable by, endless online services. And what we don't want to end up with is the Facebook of science. So really, that whole validation protocol is increasingly important. And I would argue that every one of us in this room is part of a kind of proud tradition, not of gatekeeping, but of validation and of bringing forward the truth.
Yeah, I would underscore that. I think it's in the back of a lot of people's minds, but I'll say it, and I think other people have said it. Preprints are dangerous. In this information space, they're dangerous. They have all the hallmarks and information carriage potential of a published journal article, but they don't have anybody really standing behind it, and they don't have anybody, they haven't been fully vetted. And so I think, we've glommed onto this, but we've dressed them up we've given them all the trade dress that you would expect, and all the carriage effects that you would want in an information sphere, but without actually validating them to even the extent of, double peer review, two-person peer review, good editorial practices, all that. And, I think that's potentially dangerous.
And one of my favorite things to do is to think about ways that we're contributing to our own downfall. And most of the time I'm applying that to politics, but in this case, this is, I believe, going to be the downfall of scholarly publishing the way that we see it today.
Unless, I want to be more positive, we put measures in place to kind of really understand the various versions. And I liked a quote that I heard in one of the sessions earlier today by Herman von de Sample, that we're not really looking for a version of record, but a record of versions. And if we, as publishers, can comfortably be custodians of that and point the way, I think that will be useful.
So I call BS. We're looking for. I know. But I don't want to see how the sausage was made. Give me the sausage. And
Okay.
I don't want the record of versions. I want the version of record. I want what you're going to stand behind. And I do think that we. Or something you said about our contributing to our own downfall. Oh, so one of the things that we have to be very careful of is that the reputation of scholarly publishing has, I think, generally been eroded over the past 20 years by all sorts of scandals that, again, have been amplified and remain persistent out there. And if we continue to have those kinds of scandals, then just like law enforcement in the U.S. currently is under threat of losing their trust because it's being eroded by people who don't want it out there gatekeeping them. We have the same risk. And the world needs gatekeepers. The world needs people to say enough, no, not right. And I think that if we abdicate that responsibility, if we abrogate that responsibility, then we deserve to lose the trust that I think we've built up over the past century or more.
Okay, we are over time, so thank you, everybody.
I